Okay, so we're going to do a quick review of 7th and 8th grade right now. We need to find the slope of each line, and I'm going to do a little bit more than that. So my starting point here, my y-intercept, is 1. I'm looking to go from one dot to the next dot through rise over run. So I'm going up 2 and over 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? So my slope here is going to be 2 over 4. This is allowed to simplify, and it becomes a slope of 1 over 2. At the end of this video, I'm going to want you to go through and put this in y equals mx plus b form. Okay? Number 2. I'm going to find the y-intercept. This is my starting point on the graph. A y-intercept can be found by going ahead and highlighting that y-axis and seeing where they intersect each other. This point right here is my y-intercept. It lies at the point 0, 1, 2, 3. We don't usually put those parentheses because a y-intercept will always have an x of 0. So the only important number is the 3. My slope. This is my rise over run. Something that messes people up about this is that I do the y's over the x's because I get out of bed before I go for a run. So I have to do the up and down before I do the left and right here. It's a little different than what we normally do in math. Here to get to the next point, I have to go down 1 over 1. To represent down, I'm going to use a -1, and I'm going to divide by 1. This is really just equal to -1. Number 3. I've talked about Vux and Hoy. This is a Hoy graph. Okay? It is a horizontal line. It looks like the horizon. My favorite horizon is a sunset. Okay? It is a horizontal graph, so it makes a Hoy. This O in the Hoy stands for 0 slope. So the H is horizontal. The O is not actually an O, it is a 0 slope. And the Y stands for, this is a Y equals. Okay. My y-intercept here is -2. My slope is 0. And I'm going to make your equation for you for this particular graph, because I want you to see that this is a possible answer. But I also want you to know that this would be an okay answer too. Okay. So when I plug in a 0 and I multiply that to x, I get a 0. And 0 minus 2 is still just -2. So the answer that I boxed is a little more correct than the bottom answer. But the bottom answer also shows me that you know everything about this line. Here I get a vertical line. This is a Vux, sorry. This is a Vux. My hint to you that it's a vux is that there is an arrow here that looks exactly like a V. So the V here means vertical. The U means undefined. The X means we are going to use an X equals. There is no y-intercept here. It will never, ever, ever come in contact with this line. So I can't get a y equals mx plus b because there is no b and there's not really a slope. So that's kind of difficult. So this is an x equals line, and instead we use the x-intercept. This is the only case that happens in. So here they want us to sketch the graph of each line. My starting point is the last number. It's my y-intercept. My y-intercept here is 1. This negative sign tells me that my graph is going to move down. And since there's no number there, we can assume that it's down 1 over 1. When multiplying, we assume ones as placeholders. When adding, we assume zeros as placeholders. 6. Here I start at positive 5. It's my y-intercept. I then move up 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And over 3. 1, 2, 3. This bothers a lot of people. They go, I can't go off the graph. And for me, personally, I would rather see you go off the graph. I think that going off the graph shows that you know that this continues on and on forever. For me, this is easier. It is easier for me to go off the graph and put a point there than it is for me to go backwards. But I would like to see you try to do both. To go backwards would be to go down 4 and then to go to the left 3 so that I still have this line. Because a negative over a negative would still make positives that just cancel out. Next page. So my starting point here is positive 1. My slope tells me how I'm going to move. Here it's a positive number, so it's going to be a positive slope. I'm going to move up 1 because I move up first, and then I'm going to move over 5. This leaves me with a dot right here. I'm then going to connect my dots, which I didn't do a very good job of. And I'm going to put arrows at the end. It is important that you have arrows at the end of every single line. So see how mine have arrows? It is important you have arrows at the end of every single line. It tells you that these lines go on and on forever. X equals negative 2. This is an x equals graph, which means that it's a vux. Vux stands for it's a vertical line, and that we're looking at the x-intercept. You can also use the fact that it's undefined to kind of tell you what the shape of it is. So some of you really like my example of Mulan climbing up that totem pole in Mulan. Some of you have not seen Mulan, and that's a shame. So if I go through and I put my line through the x-intercept, then I'm left with this vertical line that doesn't pass through my y-intercept. It's perfect. It's got an undefined slope because I can't run up it. But I've made a mistake here. Can you figure out what it is? It's important that you understand that this is a -2, so I should have had my x-intercept at -2. My line then runs through that. I get a V arrow, and it's going up and down. It's still an undefined graph. This one is more correct because it's in the right location. I will mark you down for missing the negatives. Here, I have x plus 2. This is a positive x, so it's going to be an upward sloping graph. I'm going to start at 2. I'm going to move up 1 over 1 because I can assume that there's a 1 there. And if I can assume that there's a 1 there, I can assume that there's a 1 over 1 there. I put a dot here. I connect my lines. And I add my arrows. It is important that you see that from left to right, this arrow causes a line that goes upwards. From left to right, it causes a line that goes upwards. Let's look backwards. This has an undefined slope. If I put a man here, they could not run up this unless they're Spider-Man. Even though this slope is a fraction, it's still positive. As I move from left to right, it still moves upward. Again, even though this is a fraction, it's still positive. It still moves upward as we move from left to right. This one is negative. It moves downwards as we move from left to right. I have a y equals graph. It is y equals just a number. This one always bothers people on my tests. They sit here, they put this point down, and then they don't know what to do. I told you about that word hoi. This means it's horizontal. It means it has a 0 slope. It means it's a y equals. So if I draw a horizontal line through here, and I put arrows on it, I get the line that I need. Another teacher on campus teaches it this way. She says that you must go and put dots on 3 places that y is 1. I have 4 on here right now because I kept my y-intercept. If you put a line through those dots, you can see that it makes a horizontal line. Here. Here I have a negative slope. This is going to cause my graph to move downwards. I have no y-intercept here. This is not a time to freak out. If I have no y-intercept, it relates to that number 0. I'm going to move down 4, and I'm going to move over 3 to the right. I'm going to add my arrows, and that's my line. I am going to show you that as I move from left to right, that line goes downwards. Number 12. This is in y equals mx plus b form. My y-intercept here is -1. I put it there. I want you to understand that the y-intercept goes on the y-axis. This is a big mistake I get on the test. The y-intercept must go on the y-axis. I then move up 4 over 1. Lots of people put the point here and then connect these dots. There is a secret one there. You must go over 1. I connect my line. I draw my arrows. And because there was a 4 there and it was positive, this line should go upward. And it does. I always use from left to right when I'm looking at whether it goes up or down. We read from left to right. I always use from left to right. 13. Y equals -4. I'm going to put my dot on -4, and I'm going to freak out because I don't know what to do now. I'm going to sit there and I'm going to think about things that my teacher said in class. And I remember how she walked around the room looking ridiculous and went, "Lux, hoy, lux, hoy." And I know I'm going to use a hoy because this is a y equals, and this has a y in it. It's going to be y equals my y-intercept. It's going to have a slope of 0, which is why we can't see that mx part. That h means that it's horizontal. It's going to be that horizontal line that goes through that y-intercept. You might also see teachers ask you to plot 3 points. So like here and here, where you knew that 2, -4 still had a y of 4, and where you knew that 1, -4 still had a y of 4, and then you could connect those dots. My line, as I move from left to right, does not go up, it does not go down. It is a 0 slope. Next one over. Here, I have y equals mx plus b. My b is my y-intercept. It is my starting point. 3 is my starting point. This indicates whether I'm allowed to move up or down. In this particular case, I'm going to move down because of the negative sign. So I move down 1 and over 5. This leaves me with a dot right here. I'll connect my dots or points. Some teachers might have a pet peeve about that. And I'll add my arrows. When I look at this line from left to right, it points downwards. $15. Y equals 1/2 x plus 1. I start at 1. I move up 1, over 2, and I connect my dots. I start at 1 because 1 is my y-intercept. I move up 1 over 2 because my slope is 1 over 2. This stands for 1 up, 2 over. It's positive, so I should see the line go upwards from left to right. 16. My y-intercept is -5, or +5. So I put it 5 on the y-axis. I can tell right here that my graph is going to have a negative slope, which means it goes down. I move down 5, and I move over 2. This leaves me with a line. As I read from left to right, my line goes downwards. Y equals -1. I'm starting to freak out. I think this is not in y equals mx plus b form. I just don't see it. I don't see any x's. If I see no x's, that's the same thing as seeing 0 x's. If that's the case, then I can change my b to -1. So now I know that I can graph at -1 and that I have a slope of 0. If I have a slope of 0, it's a walk that is flat and easy to do. It makes a horizontal line. Again, some of us like using the hoi. Others like to go and make sure that when they plot 3 dots, that they all have -1 as their y. Such as 0, -1, 1, -1, and 2, -1. They're all on that line. We could have plotted them first and then placed the line through it. Any way that works for you works for me, as long as it's correct. But they get harder. And I start to get problems that have x's and y's on different sides. Here, I need to get this in y equals mx plus b form, which means that I have to solve for y. To get y by itself, the easiest thing to move is 7x. We don't want to move the 12 because it's on the other side. And we like that it's on the other side because it means it's not with the y. We want to move the 7x first because it's adding to that. It's more separated from the y than the 4 is. When I do this, this cancels. I get 4y equals -7x plus 12. I'm going to divide by 4 on both sides. When I do that, I'm going to divide by 4 on everything. Some of us have been taught to do this. And although that is simpler, it is easier, it looks cleaner, it doesn't help you when I tell you that you have to simplify things. So really, even though this looks grosser, it's easier. So I get y equals -7/4x plus 3. Right here, some people freak out. It is okay that you got a fraction. It's fine. This represents our slope. It tells us whether or not we go up or down and how far we go over. This says we'll go down 7, and it says we'll go to the right 4. We're going to go ahead, we're going to start at 3, and we'll move down 7, and right 4. I'm going to put my dot there, and I'm going to connect them. Then I add my arrows because they're important, and I check that from left to right, my line in fact goes down, and it does. So to recap, when I see this, I don't get scared. I ask myself, what do I have to do to graph that? I know that it has to be in y equals mx plus b form, which means that I must solve for y. So to solve for y, I'm going to subtract from both sides to get it so that just the y area is by itself. Then I'll divide by 4, and even though it's easier to just make one line and to put the 4 on the bottom, I'm going to separate those fractions from the start. I then simplify, and I do the 12 divided by 4 makes 3. Even though the -7 divided by 4 continues to be a fraction, it's okay. It just tells us how we move. Here I have people like to do this a couple of different ways, so I'll show you this both ways. For me, Miss Dorker, I like to put this in y equals mx plus b form by getting y by itself. I move the 4x by subtracting it to the other side. When I do this, I have to rewrite it so that the x comes first. That's something some of us struggle with. So that it is in y equals mx plus b form. Then I'll divide by -1 or flip the signs of all of my terms. So I get y equals 4x plus 4. I'll go in graph, and I'll get 4 at my y-intercept, and I'll move up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and over 1. This gets me a dot that puts me off of my graph. I like to do this because personally I like to double check and make sure that I did everything right when I go backwards. So when I go backwards, I'm going to go down 4, and I'm going to go left 1. I'll connect my dots and see if they make a line. They do. I add my arrows, and I check that from left to right, my line in fact moves upwards, which it does. Okay. There's another way I could do this. I'm going to erase so that I have space. You do not erase on your paper. Some of my kids like to go through and add y to the other side. It bothers them right now that the y is negative, and it's easy for them to move it over. They say 4x equals y minus 4. They know that they have to get the y by itself to put it in y equals mx plus b form. They'll add the 4 to the other side, and they'll get 4x plus 4 equals y. Some of them will move the y over here and erase it. Others will just leave it as is, and that's totally fine. But some of us really like it being strictly in that y equals mx plus b form. So go ahead and put it that way if you want to. Your choice. 20. Here I have 2x plus y equals 2. I'm going to subtract 2x from both sides. I'm left with y equals negative 2x plus 2. Keep in mind it's important that we're writing that x first so that it's in that y equals mx plus b. It's also important that we're solving for y and not for x because we want it to be a y equals, not an x equals. I'm going to go ahead and graph it, and I know my y-intercept is at positive 2. I'm going to use this negative 2, which is my slope, to show my rise over run. Right now, some people freak out because there's only a negative 2 there. So there's not really a rise and a run. But there is an implied over 1 there, which means that I'm going to go down 2 over 1. I connect my dots, my points, with a line and add my arrows. I'm going to double check and show you that as I move from left to right, this line is going down. The answers are located on the back. I need you to double check with them. I may have done something wrong. I also would like for you to go through and on problems 1, 2, 3, and 4, I would like for you to put it in y equals mx plus b form, now that we've gone all the way through. We sketched the graph of each of these lines. I now need you to write y-intercept equals and slope equals. I want to know that you can identify these without having to watch this video over again. Some of you might have been taking notes as the video went on. It means that you probably have less work to do. You were a more diligent student. That's a reward for you. For those of you who weren't writing those notes that I didn't instruct you to do as we went through, you're going to go through, you're going to make sure that you know what the y-intercept is, that you know what the slope is. Because it's important that we understand this because we have seen that we're going to start drawing two graphs together, that they're going to intersect, that there's going to be a dot that we have to state as a solution, and it's just a little bit scary. You guys can do it, and it'll be fine. You have about 20 minutes left in class, if it took you a little while to get started, to go ahead and finish this worksheet. I am assuming that you will have extra time in class. It is a Friday. Please make sure that you have done all of the extra credit for my class and that you have checked the whiteboard to see what your homework was all week. Make sure your homework pages are all done. If not, you can work with a neighbor next to you to get them done.